Hi, my name is Elijah Foreman, and I will be talking about the Great Depression in World War II today. After World War I, we entered the Roaring Twenties. Sadly, this burst didn't last long, though, because by the end of the 20s, we entered the Great Depression. The Great Depression was caused by three major factors: the uneven distribution of wealth, overproduction, and decreased demand for goods. The uneven distribution of wealth occurred because the working class didn't have enough money to buy the products they made. Factories and farms were also being shut down because banks were focusing on them, and this caused back on the production of goods and causing many to lose their jobs. And the factories and farms weren't producing many goods because the decreased demand for the goods. The Great Depression was a hard time for America. Psychologically, many people felt hopeless because they couldn't provide for their families. This caused a record number of divorces. People also began to stop trusting the government and became very angry at the banks. And since systems like the stock market are built on image, it crashed. Our situation also affected the world because of our economy, many of our banks removed loans and investments from Europe. We also set off a chain reaction of high tariffs causing the world trade to drop. It also dropped when banks failed in places like Central Europe and when industries like agriculture production were doing badly in countries like Japan and Latin America. Around the world, many governments dealt with the depression differently. In England, they placed high tariffs, increased taxes, and regulated currency. Unlike England, instead of regulating currency, Germany decided to just print more money, making their money practically useless. Unlike the Germans, though, the United States made changes for the democratic system. We elected FDR to fix our problems, and he used a half socialist, half capitalist program to do so. Despite the extremely expensive program, unemployment was still high, and unemployment was still high also in France, even though they tried fighting unemployment by increasing worker pay and benefits. The United States elected FDR, who was the 32nd president, to fix our problems. His New Deal created mass relief programs, fought unemployment through public work projects, and investments in business and agriculture, and regulated stocks and banks. FDR had an important role during the Great Depression because of his new plan. Part of his new plan was called the AAA, which helped farmers by protecting them from price drops. Also, the CWA was a program to help the unemployment policy. It provided foreign workers with the salary of $15 a week. The NYA provided unemployment with more than 2 million high school students and college students, too. Because of FDR's actions, politically, we stopped the United States from slipping into fascism or communism. The New Deal also gave the federal government huge influence on the economy and people's lives. There were a lot of causes of World War II that came from the previous war. The Treaty of Versailles, the Great Depression, fascist aggression, and the Allied appeasement were all causes of World War II. The Treaty of Versailles, which marked the end of World War I, caused a lot of hatred toward the Weimar Republic from the German citizens because they believed it gave up the war. This crippled the government, making it easier for Hitler to take over as chancellor. The Allied appeasement was also one of the starting points for World War II. The Allied appeasement was when Germany was allowed to conquer a lot of small countries because the Allied turned a blind eye to what he was doing. Finally, the Great Depression fascist aggression was also a factor of the war because when everybody finally stood up to Hitler, he had a big problem with it. Most of the countries that responded to this really just wanted to make peace, such as Great Britain, France, the U.S., Russia. All wanted peace instead of war. In Asia, though, other than Russia, Japan pretty much had free reign over Southeast Asia and the Philippines. They all wanted peace instead of war, but Britain and Europeans had different motives than us. They didn't want war because they were still recovering from the last one, while we didn't want it because we were isolationists. The war occurred around the world, but mostly in Europe, Russia, Asia, and North Africa. Naval battles also occurred in the Pacific Ocean theater and the surrounding areas. One major naval battle happened in this area was the Battle of Midway. This battle was important because the United States inflicted heavy damage on the Japanese army or navy. Another major battle that took place was the Battle of Berlin because it was the final major attack on the European theater. This was important because it was the battle in which Hitler committed suicide and regained control of Berlin. Finally, another important battle was the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki because it showed the improvement in military technology that we had gained. We came into the war through a different through a series of different steps. Prior to the beginning of World War II, tensions were building up between us, the United States, and Japan because of them in China. In order to punish them, we stopped exporting oil to Japan, and in order to rebuttal, they bombed Pearl Harbor, and they wanted to destroy the U.S. Navy, but they failed to do so in that attack. And on December 8th, 1941, the U.S. declared war on Japan and entered World War II. The war changed American society in many ways. Since we were until the war, the government had directed everything for the war effort. Since most males were away, females had the responsibility of taking their jobs and running the country. This created a huge jump in employment, and many women and African Americans were employed during this time. During this time, the Japanese, unfortunately, were being discriminated against because of Pearl Harbor. The Mexican Americans were also being discriminated against because of reduced zoot suits, since everybody hated them since they were a big waste of materials. The youth were also being influenced by political cartoons and other forms of propaganda. Finally, in order to end the war, we dropped 2 bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This was the best way to end the war because of Japan's militaristic state and their attitude of no quitting no matter what. The bombs killed an estimated of 246,000 people combined, and this caused Japan to surrender. There were many effects of the war, but short term, the amount of deaths caused by the Holocaust was about 11 million and was one of the biggest effects. Another effect was the Cold War. This happened because only 2 superpowers were left after the war, the US and the Soviet Union. The two nations fought over what they would do with Germany, and the tensions grew until the late 1980s. Another long-term effect was the creation of Israel, which was created because of the UN, which was a peacekeeping organization, and they were created to keep the peace. The UN decided to split Israel in half and give half of it to Jews and half of it to Arabs. They disagreed. The UN declared Israel as a state. Finally, in desperate times, we had desperate measures, and in this era, we had to do stuff we never did before, like give minorities and women the opportunity to run the country, and also side with one of our worst enemies, that Russian, to take down the Nazis.